But just as we're wrapping up, we're coming up to the final three topics here. When I first started this podcast, I was emailing everyone. I had like fucking maybe 8, 12 listeners. I had like 100 subscribers on YouTube. Bruce Prichard was one of the first people that said yes, which I couldn't believe or understand why he did it. Uh, in the process of doing that interview, I asked him about the infamous WrestleMania 9 rumors about the original planned card. He said no, that wasn't true. Then on the WrestleMania 9 episode of his own show, he said, oh, a lot of those were true. And I was like, what the fuck? And even recently on his podcast, he's contradicting stuff that he said about the same subject on separate episodes.
One in
So,
particular, give one example.
uh, from WrestleMania 9,
Yeah.
well, I had heard that the original plan was to do the Real American Hero gimmick with Scott Steiner, and Scott Steiner was supposed to win the Royal Rumble to wrestle Bret Hart. Uh, and he told me, he goes, no, that wasn't the plan. That wasn't the plan at all. But then on the show, on Something to Wrestle With, he said exactly that. It's like, you fucking liar. Who'd you like? So the question I've got for you is Bruce Prichard, while I'm very grateful for the interview, uh, is he full of shit?
I'll be honest with you. I am a huge Bruce Prichard fan. But even with that said, look, I don't have many connections in wrestling. I have a few friends over the years, some people that I would never make public. I cherish their friendships. And although tempting sometimes to just throw it in people's faces, I keep it private and always will. But I'll say this. One thing that I have learned over the years, whether it's Prichard or Bischoff or even Vince Russo. I'm a subscriber of all his stuff. I've been a fan of his since day one. I've never left that bandwagon. Conan, I mean, people already know my history with him not going to bring that up. My point is that if you listen to all of these guys enough over the years, one day they'll tell you the sky is blue, and then down the line they'll say the sky is actually gray. And in wrestling, there's always discussions about, hey, what do you think about this? Hey, let's try this. Or, hey, what about this? Or, hey, could you think of this? And, not all of it ever comes to fruition. I think the problem is, there's so many things discussed that as far as Steiner and Bret Hart with the Royal Rumble, I don't ever recall ever hearing those rumblings. I don't even remember ever even reading something like that in Meltzer's newsletter at the time. But that could have been something discussed and then quickly shot down. So, maybe, and you got to understand something too. Over the years, and I'm not defending these guys, but over the years, you do forget things from here. So at the time, because Steiner and Bret Hart never really was something serious, he probably was telling you the truth when he said, nah, it was never in the plans. But then later on, maybe he recalls a conversation with somebody in creative about, hey, what about the idea of having Steiner win this? I don't ever recall Scott Steiner, and I was a WWF fan at the time. I don't ever recall Scott Steiner ever getting any type of momentum where he could possibly win the Royal Rumble. Even when me and my friends would just, talk to each other and say, who do you think's going to win? I don't ever recall anybody ever saying, Scott Steiner, he's on that momentum. That guy, he could win the run. It just was never in the cards. So I think sometimes they immediately don't remember something and then it'll hit them. But I also think too that because Vince and Jim Ross and others never come out publicly and say, that's not true. That's not true. You're full of shit, this and that. I think, if sometimes they will twist and change and this and that, especially years later, if an idea sounds like it would have been wonderful, somebody may years later say, yeah, we actually thought about doing that. And that's simply because you got a whole bunch of people who are listening or watching your show. Not you, I'm saying, but them. And they're like, oh my God, that was so smart. Oh, could you imagine what that would have been? And that just sparks a whole new discussion and conversation. Meanwhile, they're talking right out of their ass. A lot of stuff that is said and it becomes urban legend. A lot of stuff people talk out of their ass. Unfortunately, it happens more and more when people are deceased, because unfortunately the dead cannot come back to life to say that somebody's full of shit. But anybody who is exaggerated like that, none of them do it with any type of malice. It's just, why didn't I think it out at the time? Holy shit, what a great fucking idea. Oh, I know. I could say, hey, we were discussing that at the time, but, it just didn't work out the way it did. Or Vince, and then they realize, it never happened. So these guys do talk out of their ass. It is what it is. You can't, take everything as gospel. But you could tell if you listen to people long enough, you could tell when people start twisting and churning. And you saw that with Bruce Prichard, but I'm still a big fan of his. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. He'll say something and 3 years later, it's totally the opposite.